Hey everyone, it's Professor Snart. Hope you're having a good day. A little quick check-in here just to keep us on track and take a look at some of what's going on in our creative writing course. We're kind of getting towards the end, like I'd mentioned in my earlier announcement, one of those weird times in the semester where it feels like you're close to the end and yet there's still a lot of work to do. It feels like that Monty Python gag, if you've ever seen it, where the guy is running towards the camera and runs over hills but never really gets closer to the camera but keeps running towards the camera. So anyway, sort of a weird, like I said, time in the semester and you feel close but also not totally close. Okay, so we have just finished up our Unit 10 here with the Padlet assignment and discussion board. We now move into our poetry workshop. Again, I think I've talked about this a few times in previous announcements, but you're also, pretty familiar with the workshop model here, really investing in producing your own work, but also taking risks because, you're not graded on the so-called quality of the work so much as what I can perceive as the investment of time and energy. And then also really valuable that quality of the feedback that you're providing to people. Poetry especially can be even more challenging than commenting on genres that are maybe a little more familiar to us or a little more accessible in some ways. But do your best, right? Apply all of the rules of how the workshop works in terms of framing constructive criticism, looking for strengths but also areas for improvement, not just editing for basic punctuation. That becomes really problematic in poetry. So maybe you see a word spelled wrong. We assume that that's just a typo, but things like grammar and punctuation are even less regular in poetry than we might find in like fiction or creative nonfiction. So it's hard even to look for those things or figure out what's a mistake versus an intentional move on the writer's part. Look for or frame your discussion or your comments in terms of the rules of creative writing that we've been trying to practice. Feel free to ask questions as a way of framing constructive criticism. So you wondered about, or you could ask the writer, did you intend for this to mean or to be or to whatever? Don't forget to, comment on a title. Poems should really have titles, and the title should do substantial work in the poem. Ideally, titles don't give away the poem, like what the big lesson or moral or theme of the thing is, even though that for many people is the go-to thing. Like, I'm going to write this really sort of interesting cryptic poem about love or nighttime or whatever, but then I'm going to title it Love or Nighttime. Almost like the Spark Note version of the poem is in the title, and we really don't want that. But make sure you've got a title and make sure that it's doing something productive in the poem. One good little trick, often if you're stuck for a title, I bet 90% of the time it's already buried in the poem somewhere. So find an interesting phrase or set of words, and even if you duplicate that in the poem itself, it can often make for a really good title. So don't necessarily delete it from the poem and make it become the title, but let it exist in both places. You can also, as a reader, comment on the use of white space or things like line breaks or stanza breaks between the different verses. Should there be some? Does it work to not have those? Do long line work? Do short lines work? Do the line breaks themselves work? Again, that's an aspect that we now have access to as readers that we don't usually comment on as far as something like a work of prose fiction, for example. So that takes us through poetry. We then move into our final workshop, turning right around, our open genre workshop. So again, pursuing a genre that maybe we've done before but you'd like to return to, or a subgenre of, say, fiction, which is obviously a huge category, or maybe a genre that we haven't talked about at all. If you go off script a little bit, that's cool, but maybe, especially if you're really going far afield, check in with me just to make sure it's something that practically will work for our purposes. But again, this is your chance to sort of experiment and really challenge yourself to do something different or to work in a genre where you don't feel most confident or comfortable, for example. It's really the whole purpose of the course, right, is to expand what you can do as a writer. So units 11 and 12, right, pretty standard stuff for us at this point. Unit 13 I'm actually going to jump into here because it's a little bit different. So there's really nothing built into our course, largely just because of the scope of things that we have to cover, that allows us to revise extensively or a whole piece, but at least here we have the opportunity to think a little bit about revision skills. And truthfully, the creative writing course, it teaches us about writing, but in many ways, revision is the most important part of writing. We never, no writer I think has ever published literally the first draft of something, no professional published writer. Even those that claim to write just like as it is on the page, there's almost always some level of revision, and not just editing, but sort of like re-seeing the whole thing. 99.9% of writers do that, and I would say 90% of writing isn't generating that first draft, although we know how hard that is sometimes, but it's doing the revisions to make that first draft better and really impactful. So we're going to do what we can here to address the idea of revision. So we are going to return to our portfolio page, or you might have to dive back into Blackboard, depending on what you're looking for, to find a piece of writing that you've created for the class. It doesn't necessarily have to be a workshop piece, although that obviously works the best. But it does have to be a piece of creative writing. So not just a discussion board post, but maybe like the tchotchke activity that we did a while back, that significant object. Maybe, I'm trying to think of something like the This I Believe creative nonfiction piece. The only drawback is because we didn't have those as workshop, items, we didn't necessarily focus on peer feedback, which obviously our revision exercise kind of depends on. So your job is to find 3 comments that you received on written work from the course, your written work, and then revise based on those comments. So clearly not necessarily comments on the same exact, phrase or paragraph or sentence or whatever. Pardon me. But 3 separate comments that you've got from your peer reviewers across, the whole kind of area of our course. Again, you're not revising an entire thing, we're just focused on revising a passage. So what you want to do is obviously scan through comments that you've received. Basic editing things like just changing punctuation, those aren't going to work. You just make that change and it's better because it's grammatically correct or whatever, or it fixes a typo. We want to look for higher order things like fleshing out a character, developing dialogue, cutting back a certain place, choosing one good description word rather than 5 that just kind of muddy the water. So what you're going to do is build out a portfolio page here for our revision activity, and we're going to try as best we can to do like a before, what's the suggestion, here's the after, so you're actually going to make some of those changes or revise based on that feedback, and then in a short paragraph reflect on why you think the revised version is more effective than the original. It doesn't even mean that this is the last version it could be, it's just the most recent, and you think it's more effective because it's more concise. It clarifies something, it develops something, whatever the case might be. So we're going to try to use the Google Docs revision history to help us with this. And you can contact me if you run into problems, because I know some people have maybe done revisions already, or if you accidentally delete or intentionally delete a document, or if you resolve comments, which might happen sometimes, it can make this a little more challenging. At the very least, we want the comment and the revised version, but ideally you want to go back to the original, find, cut and paste that actual text, post it into your portfolio so we see the before, cut and paste the comment, or even just retype it if it's short enough, so we see the comment, and then do your revision right there on the portfolio page, or in the document itself, but we need to see it on the portfolio page. So I just want to show you real quick. I'll see if I can find a good example here. So this is the syllabus from a different class of mine, and one of the things that you'll see, even if you happen to have resolved all the comments, like down that right-hand margin, up in the right-hand corner is that comment, little icon. So there aren't going to be any comments in this particular document since it's just one that I created. But if you click that, it'll actually give you, this is a new Google feature, which is actually great. It will give you, or you can reopen any of the comments. So you can almost like go back to that string of comments and see what they were. The other thing that might prove useful if you've subsequently revised or changed a document is if you click up at the top where it says last edit was or saved or whatever it says on your end, Google saves pretty much almost every keystroke that was ever made in a document. So it's just off to the right here on my screen. But you could go back to like when I first created the document, and looks like I cut and pasted an older version of the course as a starting place, and then I made edits, which you can actually see, right? Pretty amazing what Google archives for us that we maybe even never know about. And if you made changes to whatever document, piece of writing that you're looking at, and you want to go back to what it used to look like, you can flip through these revision histories, and then again up at the top, you can't quite see it, you can restore this version or just sort of cut and paste right from whatever you can see, even if it's like crossed out stuff. Don't worry if you restore the version either intentionally or by mistake. It doesn't mean that you lose all of the progression or progress forward, because you can always again go back into the version history and just restore the one that you actually want, and then you can arrow out of it and not make any changes whatsoever. So back into our course then. So we want to use the Google Talk format then to do our best to build out our portfolio and think a little strategically about revision, to actually take 3 comments that you've received on pieces of writing that you've done, and then present the before version, what's the comment, and now give us the after version. And again, not entire pieces, but maybe just a paragraph or a substantial enough piece that we can see it as revised, but it's not like we have to rewrite massive pieces of text, pages and pages of stuff, okay? Again, look at classmates' work, reply to at least 4, use the discussion board here to publish your portfolio URL so we can see the before, comment, after, and the final sort of short paragraph reflecting on why you think the new revised version is better or more effective than that older version. And since I'm here, I'm just going to jump into our very last folder, just off the screen here, but I'll click into it. So Unit 14, our final reflection, maybe one of the more traditional assignments we've done excuse me, for our class. So kind of a version of the what have you learned in the class, but we're going to return to our course objectives here that we've been, as you know, like sort of immersed in just about everything that we do. You are, again, using your portfolio to sort of build that final reflection that's centered around the various goal or course objectives that we've been working towards. Build this out in a way organizationally that makes sense to you, even if it's sort of point by point here for each bullet. It's not like you have to jam them into one big essay block of text. And then, again, as always, try to really ground your discussion in the specifics of your work for the course. So I achieved the objective of producing fiction, poetry, etc., by writing a number of pieces of different genres of creative writing. For example, in unit whatever, I wrote, and then maybe quote a little bit from yourself. This shows that I achieved the objective because, and then fill in that blank. So really the most like non-creative writing assignment, in as much as unlike a short story or poem where you want to leave some room for the reader to imagine connections or infer kind of meaning or themes and what's going on. In this one, more like an essay, at least in as much as we want to really spell it all out for the reader. Connect all those dots, fill in all the blanks, etc., etc. Well, let's see again, right? Post the URL. We have the discussion component here, and that's about it. So I'll certainly check in before we get quite this deep into our course, right towards the very end of it, but at least we have kind of a vision forward for the various final units that we've got coming ahead of us. As always, if you have questions or concerns, you can be in touch with me. And again, I'll reiterate, if you want to set up a time to meet, either virtually or face-to-face, to talk a little more in depth about your writing, I'm more than happy to do that. So just let me know.